Well, hey, friends, welcome again to another fun conversation on the Wonder of Tolkien. I have a fun guest today, Jordan Rannells. Thanks for reaching out, brother. Really excited to nerd out on Tolkien. He is a musician, a sound engineer, a composer, a certified Tolkien nerd. You have to be, especially on this channel. An editor of the PPP podcast, which many of you probably know and enjoy, and is well known as a creator of the Long Expected Soundscape, a 3D audio experience through the Lord of the Rings, and it is an experience. And so if you don't know what that is, you are in for a treat, because we're not going to just talk about it. We're going to listen to it. And so, Jordan, I would love for you just to introduce yourself and maybe just tell a little bit about the background and how you got into all of this.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
My Tolkien story, I guess, is a bit interesting because I was at an age when the movies came out that I kind of don't remember watching them for the first time, like I just kind of, it was like part of my memory, and the thing that really hooked me though was the appendices, the making of for those movies, all the behind the scenes. I loved all of that stuff, watching John Howe work on art and watching the sound engineers do their thing and blah, blah,
So
blah,
cool.
blah, blah. So that was really the kind of catalyst for being interested in music and sound effects and things like that. And then Star Wars obviously is a big catalyst for that kind of thing too. And then I discovered Phil Dragish's audiobooks, the unofficial audiobooks that have sound effects and stuff like that in them. And he does all the voices like in the movies, so I was like,
Wow.
oh, this is pretty cool. And that was actually the first time that I went through the books properly, was with those audiobooks, actually.
Okay.
And from then, as they say, the rest is history. But it's kind of evolved since then. I started editing for the Prancing Pony, which has been a lot of fun. And, I have no choice but to be like in depth with it through that, right? It's just evolved more and more. And I've always wanted to, one of my goals, I guess you could say, or dreams would be to do film composing. I would love to do that kind of thing. Or to do sound design for movies. Like that's always what I thought would be awesome to do.
Yeah.
So these soundscapes have been an awesome chance to do that without the kind of box of having to fit it to a movie, right? I have a lot more play with just having audio to play with. I don't have to lock it to any picture or anything like that. So
Wow.
that's a bit of an introduction to how I got into stuff.
That's amazing. And so you were listening to that unofficial audiobook. That's a big jump to say, I'm going to listen to it. This is beautiful. And then I want to just just give us a ballpark. How many hours did you spend doing the Long Expected Soundscape, the investment?
Yeah. So I had the idea to do a Kickstarter, and so did the Kickstarter, lots of awesome support from the Prancing Pony, fan base and things like that, and other, like the OneRing.net and things like that, and got funded. And from that point, I started writing music for all these characters, sound design for the Balrog and for everything, recording ambience, which we can get all into this stuff later more. But from that point, I think it was like a year and a half of just doing Lord of the Rings, kind of like hyper-focused on that. And looking back at it, I wish that I'd taken longer.
Wow.
But I was just like hyper-focused on that for that, year and a half. And it was really a lot of fun. I think the thing that excited me the most about it is that this way of using audio, we have like graphic audio things, and we have like the BBC radio drama and things like that,
Yeah.
which are kind of doing the same thing. Audible has the Sandman that has sound effects and things like that. But in all of those cases, it's always abridged in some way. And I wanted to do that, but without it being abridged. I want the full deal, all 63 hours worth of it. So
Jeez Louise.
that's what this project is. So yeah.
That's amazing. I told Jordan earlier, and we're gonna listen to a sample in a moment. I put this on. If you don't know what it is, there's score and themes and sound effects and ambient noise, and I put it on in New Zealand, literally in Middle Earth last year, with my kids reading the books, and it was. It was like a out of body experience, and I'm not even joking. It was like, this is so weird. I feel like I'm in a different realm, and so
awesome.
it definitely is immersive in the way you want it to be. You did such a well job, where you can read through the books, but also not get lost in the sound. It carries the story with it. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so the soundscape has all these different applications, and the initial idea was you sit down with your book and open it up and read while the soundscape is happening. So all these sounds are happening as you're reading the words. But it's also timed to the official audiobook, which is not included, obviously, but you can put the two of them together. And then you get this like full movie experience where you're getting the narration and everything happening around it. But people also use the files for D&D nights. They use, for playing LOTR and stuff like that.
Yes.
So there's lots of ways that you can listen, and you can also just, like we were talking about before the call, you can just put the soundscape files on, and because they're so hyper detailed, you'll be able to tell where you're at in the story just by listening to the audio without the narration. So it's pretty fun.
It's so true. I know in a different interview you talked about the pacing of Andy Serkis is kind of slower, so I was reading always ahead, but I just waited until I heard some horses or a carriage and I knew where I was. So we're going to go detailed into this because I can't imagine how much work you had to go through to pinpoint the exact moments of every sound. It's crazy.
Yeah. So if you want, we can break it down. If you think about it, chapter 1 is about an hour and 20 minutes long, I think.
Okay.
In terms of the audiobook file with Andy Serkis. So I mean, that's like some movies are that long. The Council of Elrond is well over. I think the Council of Elrond is getting pretty close to 2 hours.
That's a full movie.
Treebeard is past 2 hours, I think. But what I do is I start by outlining it. I take that audiobook chapter and I listen to it and I say, okay, from this point to this point, Gandalf's cart is coming up the hill. And when he gets out of the cart, like there's people helping him take stuff out of the cart, so I got to take note of that. I got to take note of where we are. So we're in the Shire, what time of day it is, all this kind of stuff, so that later I can put in the correct ambience. Wow. And there's a really awesome national park near, I think it's about 2 hours away from here, that I took my 3D microphone and recorded out there. So that's the kind of ambience that you hear in the Shire. All this kind of stuff, going through each moment of each chapter and kind of outlining what would they hear, and putting all those sounds in later, and then writing music for each one of those scenes as well, which is like a whole other process. So I usually do it in steps. I do the outlining first.
Okay.
Just so that I can be like, okay, what do I need? What do I have to
There's so
come
much.
up with? Yeah. So much just in one chapter. And then you get to the really crazy chapters like the Pelennor Fields and stuff like that, where it's just tons and tons and tons going on. So I do the outlining, and then I usually make the ambiences next. So I record and I use samples that I have to kind of create the environment that we're in. And obviously I can't go out and record all of them. I don't have a Mordor out to back. But I use a lot of different elements to create these environments. And then I put those in, and then I will start to layer sound effects on top of that. And the sound effects, especially in Lord of the Rings, are very real and tactile, right? Like, what would Frodo hear in these moments? What would Pippin hear? A good example is, when Pippin is in Minas Tirith and the siege is starting to happen, we're in Pippin's point of view.
Yeah.
So the battle sounds would be really far away. Even if they're like up close described, he's far away. So we have to have that in the
Whoa.
distance. So I'm trying to keep track of all of that stuff. And it's a really fun exercise to bring the story to life in that way, because there's things that you don't think about when you're just reading. And the example that I've brought up before is, the sounds of their horses are there the whole time, not just when they're mentioned the one time at the beginning, they're walking with the horses the whole time. So things like that last underneath. And, like when they get on the cart with Farmer Maggot, the wagon sounds and stuff like that are there for like a decent amount of time. And it's fun to listen to the story and have all these sounds that you might not realize are there the whole time.
Yeah.
What would they actually be hearing? And you get this, the chaos of the Pelennor fields and stuff like that, the thunder at Helm's Deep and all this kind of crazy stuff. So that's the sound effects layer. A lot to do for that. And I do Foley stuff, so things that like clothes movements and stuff like that, and footsteps that are pretty specific. And then after that, I usually do something I call signature sound design, which is things that are unique to Lord of the Rings or whatever project I'm working on. So like I can't find the sounds for a Balrog somewhere. I have to design it, right? So there's a lot of elements like that I have to specifically design so that I can then put those in, and try and, not copy the movies necessarily, but I'm also not afraid to take inspiration from those. But there's decisions that I have mentioned before in other interviews that I did, like the Mumakil sound like elephants in mine. They don't sound like some other sound in the movies that they specifically avoided so that you would not think of an elephant being hurt. So mine are all very real. Like, what would it sound like? That was the question. And lots of thought put into how far is the waterfall in Rivendell? Like, would you hear Rauros at this point? Like, all these kind of things.
That's crazy.
And then it gets into like a filmmaking point of view where it's like, okay, you would hear this, but should we hear it at this point? Like from a stylistic point of view, or should the music take over? All these kind of things come into play, and it's really just based off of what I feel is right or what works or whatnot like that. And then the big journey of the music starts after that, which is writing themes for all of the characters that you don't get to see in the movies. So that means they don't have music for the movies, like Glorfindel and Tom Bombadil and things like that. So I wrote all of those themes, and then I sit down with each chapter and say, as if it was a movie, where does the score start? Where does it end? Where does this scene start? Where does it end? And the music will kind of guide you through emotionally. So lots of stuff going on there.
Process.
Yeah.
I would love to know, before we do a sample and give just our audience a real immersive experience, I would love to know I'm just dying to know. You had so much hours in the world and so much hours thinking through the text and the story. What was there anything that surprised you about the story as you spent so much time in a very analytical way thinking through it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And one of the things that for Lord of the Rings, but also for some of the other books that I've started to do this for, is the soundscape process really outlines the author's pacing really interestingly.
Oh, interesting.
Where a good example is we start off with the Hobbits for quite a long time, which means that we have a lot of Hobbit music for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And part of me at the start was like, ooh, this is going to be a lot of the same kind of music over and over. and it's not looped or anything like that, but the same kind of themes and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But just like with the writing, it works really well where we have all this Hobbit content to create like meaning for the Shire, and then we leave it for a long time. And so at the end, when we come back to it, it's really nice, right? So things like that, like the structure where an example I love bringing up is when all of our crew is in Isengard after the battle that we don't get to see. And they're kind of sitting and Pippin's telling the story of what happened, right? Like in the movies, you could be inclined to like add the sound effects of the Ents and things like that and make it epic and whatever. But that chapter really serves as like a downtime for the reader, especially when you compare it to the sound effects and things like that that are on either side of it, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that happens near it. So you really need that. Same with Tom Bombadil's house. We need that downtime, which means that we need, in my adaptation, if you want to call it that, we need it to be low key as well. We need the ambience to be low key. We need the sound effects to be more relaxed, the music to be more relaxed, because that's the arc of emotional kind of roller coaster, I guess you could say, that's happening. So it really, that was one of the things that was really the most interesting to me, was to see these ebbs and flows and how natural it felt for me to emulate that, right? Like there wasn't really too much of me like, oh, I don't know what I should do, because the writing style kind of lays it out so clearly, like what would feel right for here or there. Many Meetings is a good example, you know, where it's very music rich there, but it's very warm and welcoming, and it's like what we need after the craziness that just happened, you know. So I think that would be, if I had to choose something, that would be probably the most interesting part of the process for me, is to have the kind of pacing and arcs of the story kind of revealed to me in a grander scale, if that makes sense.
That's beautiful.
Really, really interesting.
Oh, man. Okay, we're going to talk all about the process, but before that, you want to give us a little teaser on this beautiful thing? If you're listening, guys, put your headphones in. Put your headphones in.
Yeah, the tech that I'm using is called binaural audio, and to have that work properly, you got to have headphones in. So we're going to play, is maybe like a 5-minute sample okay? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm down. That's great. Yeah, whatever you want. Give people a real experience.
We're going to do, I'll share my screen here. And you just let me know when you can hear it.
Chapter 10.
It's great.
The Choices of Master Samwise. Frodo was lying face upward on the ground, and the monster was bending over him, so intent upon her victim that she took no heed of Sam and his cries until he was close at hand. As he rushed up, he saw that Frodo was already bound in cords, wound about him from ankle to shoulder, and the monster, with her great forelegs, was beginning half to lift, half to drag his body away. On the near side of him lay, gleaming on the ground, his elven blade, where it had fallen useless from his grasp. Sam did not wait to wonder what was to be done, or whether he was brave or loyal or filled with rage. He sprang forward with a yell and seized his master's sword in his left hand. Then he charged. No onslaught more fierce was ever seen in the savage world of beasts, where some desperate small creature armed with little teeth alone will spring upon a tower of horn and hide that stands above its fallen mate. Disturbed, as if out of some gloating dream by his small yell, she turned slowly, the dreadful malice of her glance upon him. But almost before she was aware that a fury was upon her greater than any she had known in countless years, the shining sword bit upon her foot and shore away the claw. Sam sprang in inside the arches of her legs, and with a quick upthrust of his other hand, stabbed at the clustered eyes upon her lowered head. One great eye went dark. Now the miserable creature was right under her, for the moment out of the reach of her sting and of her claws. Her vast belly was above him with its putrid light, and the stench of it almost smote him down. Still his fury held for one more blow, and before she could sink upon him, smothering him and all his little impudence of courage, he slashed the bright elven blade across her with desperate strength. But Shelob was not as dragons are. No softer spot had she, save only her eyes. Knocked and pitted with corruption was her age-old hide, but ever thickened from within with layer on layer of evil growth. The blade scored it with a dreadful gash, but those hideous folds could not be pierced by any strength of men, not though elf or dwarf should forge the steel, or the hand of Beren or of Turin wield it. She yielded to the stroke, and then heaved up the great bag of her belly high above Sam's head. Poison frothed and bubbled from the wound. Now, splaying her legs, she drove her huge bulk down on him again. Too soon, for Sam still stood upon his feet, and dropping his own sword with both hands, he held the elven blade point upwards, fending off that ghastly roof. And so, Shelob, with the driving force of her own cruel will, with strength greater than any warrior's hand, thrust herself upon a bitter spike. Deep it pricked, as Sam was crushed slowly to the ground.
Oh, man.
No such anguish had Shelob ever known, or dreamed of knowing, in all her life.
Gosh. That is epic.
There we go. That's a bit of a sample.
Louise. I was like on the edge of my seat listening to that.
That was such a fun one to do.
Wow.
But hopefully that gives people an idea of, when you listen to that and then you start thinking about other moments, like the March of the Ents, the Battle of Pelennor Fields, the like the battle with the Balrog, all these kind of moments. There's so much epic stuff to happen. But then what some of my favorite stuff is the Strider chapter, sitting in with just the sounds of the campfire, kind of thing in there, and all these quiet moments. One of my favorite things that I did for this was we have a family canoe, a wooden canoe, and I took my 3D microphone out, put it in the canoe, and was canoeing down the river. And when you listen to the Great River, that's me, like, so the ambience sounds as it should, because that's me actually doing that. So that was a lot of fun. And there's I had a friend who I gave my 3D microphone to, and he did some horseback riding with it.
Wow,
so
beautiful.
Gandalf on the way with Pippin to Minas Tirith is all point of view kind of riding, because that's where you're at. So lots of fun little tiny things like that throughout.
That is amazing. That just shows the depth, like the realism that Tolkien made in the story, and then you match that with real sounds, which add to the layers and depth. What, just to kind of back us up to the process, how do you kind of shared a little bit about this before, but how do you decide when there's music, when there's not, what sounds to use? Like, because you could just have music throughout and sound effects layered. So how are you deciding those things?
Yeah. So like I said, I do spotting sessions, but the big decisions for me are, I start by adding all of the sound effects that you would hear.
Okay.
And then if later I decide that, like, oh, maybe we want some music here instead, then I'll pull them down, or take them out completely. It depends on what the focus should be, like what Tolkien is trying to get across. There's good examples, like, the question that would come up is, like, how did you do the songs? How did you do the poetry? And that was an example where, first of all, Andy is doing his own thing. It's not like a professionally composed song that he's singing necessarily. So I let those moments breathe on their own. So when it comes to a piece of poetry, the music dies down and then totally gone. So it's just ambience. And then we hear the poetry and let it stand on its own, if you want to say that. But then there will be moments where a good example is the start of the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, where we have this introduction that's narration. And so there's a lot of kind of build-up music, and then it cuts off, and it's all battle sounds with no music for a little while. And the music only comes back, I think, when the fell beast swoops over, and then it we get this whole Eowyn thing, and it's amazing. But a lot of it is by feel, wow. Should we hear music here? Should we not? And what's really cool about these projects, I think, just from like a global point of view, is that the projects are kind of living. So I always have the sessions. I can always add to them if I want. I can always change and adjust if new better technology comes around. And then I can just re-release it, and people don't have to pay for it again or anything like that. So a good example is I've had a few people reach out and say, hey, in this scene, I was really hoping to hear this sound and I didn't hear it as much as or whatever. And I can make those adjustments and re-release it. So
Whoa.
That's a lot of fun. Because 63 hours worth, I won't pretend that I can catch everything. And there's just things that might not occur to me to put in. Yeah. And I've talked about this before, but one of the most fun conversations I had was with military historian Brett Devereaux. We talked about, because he's a huge Tolkien person as well, and we talked about what battle sounds would you hear, what would you not, what would be accurate, what would be not. And he was like, they didn't have plate armor, so none of that like clinking metal kind of thing, that they wouldn't have had that technology, so it would be chainmail type stuff. Arrow volleys, where everyone holds and then looses, that's not a thing, so don't be doing that. So all these kind of decisions, and just how loud, we talked about how loud Grond would be when it hits the walls, like how that would sound, and all these kind of conversations that, again, it goes into like cinematically, I guess, what works, but I want to start it with what the realistic sounds would be, and then change it from there to be like stylistically interesting, I guess. But things that you don't think about from the movies, where when Sam puts the ring on in at the, near the end of book 5, it heightens his sound awareness like crazy. Mm-hmm. So the orcs are coming, and in the soundscape, it's like really like detailed and loud and stuff like that. But that's stuff that you might not think about if you're used to just reading, or if you're used to the movies in some way. Things like that were really fun. I kind of lost where the question was in there, but hopefully that was a useful answer.
No, it was. And for folks who don't know, once you purchase it, you get a link to the podcast, and that has different versions. So you can have the full version, just the ambience, just the sound effects, just the music, right, too?
Yep. All these different kind of mixes of it if you want. If you're playing D&D or something like that and you want some Shelob's Lair ambience, you could just put that on and not have the music, to have like the feel of it and stuff. So lots of different ways that you can experience it, for sure. That's been a lot of fun, and that's just like how I would want to be able to consume it as well. So it's nice having those choices. And I do have the question will come up of how do I put the two together? If I have the audiobook and I have the soundscape, how do I put the two together to enjoy it? And I do now have a soundscape syncing app that one of my amazing backers made for me.
Amazing.
So people can just choose the 2 folders, and it'll put them together for you. You have to obviously own both yourself, and then you can put them together, and then you get new files, and you can just listen to those. So that's really exciting.
That is epic. And if you guys go to his website, you'll see there's way more books. The Wheel of Time, the Kickstarter just did. Yep,
Wheel of
he
Time
has. Harry Potter.
Yeah.
The Hobbit just released. You're going to be working on the Silmarillion.
Yep.
Epic. That is wild.
And I do have to say quickly too, some people might say, I prefer Rob Inglis. Those are the versions that I grew up on or whatnot. And he just has a different feel. And Lord of the Rings is timed for both now. So they're both included in the same thing. Like you get both versions of the files. So if you want to sync it with Rob Inglis, you can do that too. That's not ready for The Hobbit yet because I just released The Hobbit.
Cool.
But it will be eventually. And same with Wheel of Time. If it's timed with Michael Kramer and Kate Redding. But eventually it'll be with the Rosamund Pike version as well. So again, just because I would want to listen to both versions as well. I want to have both of them because they're totally different things. And a good example is that Treebeard chapter, like I said, is like, if not 2 hours, then a bit more with Andy. And I think I said it was a full 40 minutes shorter with Rob Inglis. That's how the pacing is different. So
yeah, Andy reads. He's very dramatic in his storytelling.
He's performing it for sure. Yeah. So totally different feels though. But yeah, that's all included. So yeah, you get access to a podcast feed that has all those versions. You get access to a Google Drive that has the files if you want to download them instead. And sync them and all that kind of thing. So, yeah.
How, with all the sound effects you're making, like you shared, you got the recording in the canoe or the horseback riding. Like, what's the mixture? Are you going to certain places? Is it just around your home? Like, is most of it a majority of real sound effects and some of it, of course, just digital? Like, what's the breakdown for that?
Yeah, so I have access to, when I did the Kickstarter, I purchased a huge sound effects library. And that is from Mark Mangini. It's his collection from Pro Sound Effects. Mark Mangini, for people that don't know, is the sound designer for Dune, Blade Runner, all these amazing movies. So I knew that was going to be a really good kind of base collection to have. So that's for, I don't know, door sounds and wagon sounds and all these kind of things that I don't necessarily have access to.
You don't have a wagon, Jordan?
Yeah, that's right. So I pull from that, but the Foley stuff is stuff that I kind of have to do myself. There's a lot of that in Harry Potter, actually. I had such a hilarious time for those that know when the letters are coming in.
Yes.
And I can't pull in sound effects for that, so I'm crinkling letters and stuff like that to make all that happen.
Wow.
And it was just hilarious to do that. But then, like I said, there's designed things where I have to design it myself. And even some of the ambience is designed with Fangorn. I recorded a bunch of ambience in a forest, but then I went to the recording school that I used to teach at and used the tape machine there. And I actually played it slower on the tape machine, so it sounds, the creaks are very low pitched and things like that. It's very otherworldly sounding. So yeah, a lot of it is, using sounds that I've recorded or using sounds from this library, but manipulating them in some way to make them fit more specifically. And the ambience is really something that I have a fun time with because as I did Wheel of Time, as an example, how do I make Wheel of Time ambience sound not like Lord of the Rings ambience? It needs to sound different. So I have to pull from different regions of, because I have ambiences in my libraries that are from different places. So I have to kind of section them off and be like, okay, this is Rivendell. And Rivendell should sound like Rivendell in Lord of the Rings, in The Hobbit, they have to sound similar. Yep. But Mirkwood has to sound totally different from Fangorn and from the other forests that we spent time in. So, a lot of kind of thought going into how to make it feel different, how to make it feel, and same with the score. How do I make the score feel like it's from Lord of the Rings, but like a kind of younger version for The Hobbit. And you get in The Hobbit, you get into these decisions of, it's a kid's book, you could say. So is it going to be as scary as, like, is it going to be as vivid and as real as Lord of the Rings? Maybe not. And that's even like reflected in the way that it's told. Like, Bilbo's not there for the battle. He gets knocked out. And we hear about it later. So it's not as up close and personal and bloody as you might hear on the Pelennor Fields,
That's good.
And I had a really fun time. My nephew is the perfect age for The Hobbit, and so I sent him a couple chapters and said, "Can you listen to this and tell me what you think of it?" Just to hear his thoughts. So that was really cool. But designing the wing flaps of Smaug and stuff like that. What did that sound like? A lot of fun decisions and immersion. But with Wheel of Time and with Harry Potter, it's a whole different challenge because there's a lot more actual, I don't know if actual is the right word, but there's a lot more magic happening, like I have to design spells. I have to design the one power in Wheel of Time. And whereas in Tolkien, it's like natural kind of things, like elemental kind of magic maybe happening.
Yeah, that's true.
A lot more mysterious. So when Gandalf does stuff, it's like described as a thunderclap. It's described in these natural ways. But when you get to Harry Potter and things like that, it's magic. So a lot more designing has to go into that.
Wow.
So
how do you decipher between the movies that you're hearing? Like you said earlier, you want to have some kind of reference, and that's in the background of most people, especially with Howard Shore's music and then the sound effects. Are there some things that you said, I want to keep it similar, some things that you wanted to do on your own that was really clear?
Yeah, I think that coming at it from an angle of, I want it to be as realistic as possible.
Yeah.
Was the best starting point, because again, I don't have to have it make sense visually.
True.
In this sense. So when I did the Balrog, that was a really, really fun exercise, because amazing voice talent of mine that's been helping with some of these is Tyler Johnson, and he performed the Balrog, like doing growls and things like that. And I have a piece of software that can take that input and, based off of that input, output a different sound that has the same shape and same like envelope to it, right? So we had all this like fire and creaking and stuff like that. So he would like roar and it would come out as like flame blasts and stuff like that. And he did it all live, kind of thing. Like he performed it live. So that's not what they did in the movies. So it's kind of like coming at it from a different angle.
That's so cool.
He also, as a quick side note, does a like 1-for-1 Gollum impression.
Whoa.
And so in Riddles in the Dark, you'll hear him like scrabbling and hissing and stuff in the background the whole chapter.
So cool.
And because Andy is reading it, you get Andy Serkis as Gollum, and then you have this amazing performance from someone who can do it exactly the same. Like it sounds exactly the same. So it sounds like Andy is just kind of continuing, as a really cool. But yeah, things like the Fell Beast. I purposefully, when I did the Kickstarter, I purposefully like stopped watching the movies. And for that, like probably a year and a half at least, I hadn't watched them again. Now it's a little bit tricky because I have all that stuff like kind of ingrained in me,
Yeah, you can't forget it.
Yeah. Especially like watching all the making ofs and stuff like that. I know how they made these things, but you get into decisions like the Balrog, where I was like, how could we do this and make it a little bit more closer to what Tolkien wrote, maybe, right? But then you have things where it's like people like the way that this thing sounds, so
yeah, true.
We're gonna do that. I didn't want to fight against, like with the score, I'm obviously not using any of Howard Shore's themes, but my score is in the same key as his. And you can do very simple things, especially when the score is so clearly defined as Howard Shore's is, where if you play a brass instrument, like a solo French horn,
Yeah.
immediately, if we're in the Lord of the Rings world, we think of Gondor. Like,
So
because it's
true.
so well established that I can just do that with a new melody and you still think of Gondor, you know?
That's amazing.
Or you can have, flutes and pan flutes and things like that, and that's automatically the Shire. I saved the choirs and vocals for the elves and all this kind of thing where I can write totally new music, new themes, all this kind of stuff. But if the instrumentation and the key is similar, you can buy into it a lot easier.
Yeah.
As an extension of the score from the movies. And I could very easily have like purposefully done the opposite,
True.
But I think that would be not what I would want, but I think it would also be, it's like the best example is like Star Wars is the music, and to have a Star Wars show or movie that doesn't use that music is a mistake, I think.
Yeah.
And so the same kind of thing here. Like, if people didn't love it so much, then yeah, I would do something different.
Yeah,
but I'm
true.
not gonna like take that away just to be different, So I had a lot of fun writing, and there's little tiny hints here and there, at like a little
Easter
theme
eggs
here and there, yeah. But really, it was all original stuff, and it's thinking of the characters as they are in the books, not how they are in the movies. Like
That's true.
there's like a Samwise theme, and then there's like a Samwise the Brave theme, and there's a Strider theme and an Aragorn theme, and there's different iterations. Like I said, there's a Glorfindel theme. We don't get to see him in the movies. There's like a little tiny hint of Beorn's theme that comes back in The Hobbit later.
Oh, cool.
Bilbo's theme in The Hobbit has its toucan bag inside that forms into the theme that you hear in Lord of the Rings.
Come on.
So lots of fun Easter eggs like that.
That is amazing. As you're putting together The Hobbit, did you think I'm going to create themes that will eventually evolve into the maturity of The Lord of the Rings, or just kept them kind of the same?
Yeah, so the thing with the Hobbit was trying to think what gets a theme, first of all, because it is, again, if you have the movies in mind, you might initially think that there's a lot of dwarven themes, but the dwarves are like not individually mentioned very much in The Hobbit.
Yeah.
So you have like Thorin's theme and the dwarvish company theme, but most of it's Bilbo, right? Most of it is Bilbo's point of view. It's his perspective on stuff, so we hear variations of his themes. We have a version of the Hobbit theme that's different. It's younger. It's higher. It's more kind of lively. It's not as big of an orchestra. All these kind of ways of making it feel smaller, maybe, and sweeter. Bilbo's theme, like I said, evolves into what we hear. We get a version of Gandalf's theme that is, again, lighter and more playful. Beorn's theme is the same. The elven stuff is really interesting because it's played on instruments that make it feel, again, a little bit more whimsical.
Yeah.
But I would be very interested, and maybe some of your listeners will have this experience of starting with The Hobbit and going to The Lord of the Rings and hearing it develop in that direction.
That's cool.
I would really love to hear from people about what that experience is like. Even the spider stuff is a little bit similar to what we heard, but smaller scale and things like that. Gollum's theme will be familiar, but it's not as like strongly developed as it is in Lord of the Rings. But you'll hear there's a little tiny moments here and there of a theme that I call chants in The Hobbit. Like when Bilbo decides not to kill Gollum, or when Gandalf shows up for the first time. There's this acoustic guitar theme that one of my backers actually played. And that theme evolves into the eucatastrophe theme that's all through Lord of the Rings. So it's cool to see that,
Oh my
you know, that
gosh.
evolution. But it's all these little,
Ugh.
that's just like one little thing, and then there's iterations of all these fun ideas that happen. So
I think people could easily think in a digital age we have, he just got some music offline. He just slapped some stuff on there. And I mean, when you listen to it, you wouldn't think that, but on the outside, you would think, who's going to do this? You know, like one man band kind of thing. But you, hopefully, as our listeners are hearing this, you see the kind of labor of love that went into this. Just like Tolkien did it for the 15, 17 years he wrote The Lord of the Rings and the 50 years of Middle Earth. There's so much like intricacies involved that you cared about, which is so cool.
yeah, yeah. And I just think that, you know, if I, like, the only time I would use pre-designed music is if I had it in a previous chapter, you know, that kind of thing. Just because it would just not be interesting to me to do it in a different, in like a sampled way, you know.
Yeah.
And even in the Wheel of Time, there's a decent amount of diegetic music that's actually in world. And so I have some guest musicians that played some lines for those, and we put those in as real world things. And
So cool.
yeah, because to do it in any, and like you say, it's very easy when you hear the idea to be like, oh, so you just like put some music in there. It's like, well, I did do that, but it's a lot more than that. You know,
I composed the music.
yeah. And yeah, every moment, and you know, there are times, and the way that I like to describe it is theme versus feel, where you know, sometimes in Journey to the Crossroads, they're just like, you know, trekking through, and it's just like not a good time, and the music is a little repetitive, and like, you know, it doesn't have much theme going on there.
Yeah.
And again, that's to try and emulate what Tolkien's writing about.
So good.
That's the fun of it for me, is to think about all those stuff. Like, wouldn't it be fun if we did this? Wouldn't it be fun if I did that?
So fun.
So
Do all the characters have themes in the whole story?
I ended up with over 100 different ones. Some of them are, you know, like the history of the elves theme is similar to Glorfindel's theme. Okay. They're not exactly the same, but they're similar. Arwen's theme is similar to Galadriel's theme, but it's, you know, got differences, or the instrumentation is different. But, you know, then you get into like I said, there's a Pippin theme, but there's also like a Pippin of Gondor variation. You know, there's a Merry theme, a Merry and Rohan kind of theme. So yeah, it would be really interesting to actually list them all out.
So crazy.
But
does the One Ring have a theme?
Yep, the theme the ring has its theme. Crazy. That you hear right away in chapter 1, I think. But Sauron has a theme. The random things, like there's a Valinor theme that's in the very ending, that will probably come back in the Silmarillion.
Yeah.
There's a little tiny mention that like 2 people will probably hear in the complex score that's happening for Orome.
That's so cool.
But like, Build Pony has a theme, like all this kind of stuff. Butterbear's theme, like all these kind of things that, you know, I thought it would be fun as a comparison to the movies to get these little characters and have them have a little musical moment, you know.
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
One maybe final question. It's advertised as 3D because you want the headphones and experience. What does that mean, and how are you recording that? Like, I don't always hear that when I hear about that.
Yeah. So I'm using Dolby Atmos to mix this.
Okay.
So I have what's called the Dolby Atmos renderer. And that means that instead of with stereo, where you have left and right, I have individual objects, they're called. And you can move the object anywhere in 3D space, and it plays with the phasing, the kind of sound levels to make it sound like it's behind you or above you or whatnot like that. So all of the elements are mixed with that, which means, when you hear Smog, he'll fly, like over top of you kind of thing, or around you, and you'll hear arrows like whip past and stuff like that. And when I present it to, like, on the podcast feed and things like that, it's usually in binaural audio. And what that means is it's stereo that is simulating all of that 3D movement.
Okay.
So you need headphones to make that happen. But I will add this. Through the kind of developments of my technique and things like that, and discovering different ways to present the files to people that buy it, starting with The Hobbit, and then kind of retroactively I'll be re-releasing Lord of the Rings in this way. The files that you'll get on the feed for The Hobbit are actual Dolby Atmos files, not a binaural render. So what that means, and this is the beauty of Dolby Atmos, is you can play it through headphones and you'll get all that 3D movement that I talked about, but you can also have it play through your sound system and it'll decode properly.
That's
if
cool.
You have a 7.1, 5.1, it'll do all that for you. You don't have to choose some different version. You can even play it off of normal stereo speakers and it'll still simulate the 3D movement like your TV might. So that's the new format that I've finally kind of solidified on how to deliver. But like I said, the project is living, so Lord of the Rings will be released that way as well.
That's cool.
But like I said before, the binaural is the experience. The Dolby Atmos version is just a little bit clearer, bigger version of the same experience.
Wow.
So
it's epic.
Yeah.
You got to put headphones on for sure. I mean, I've done it on like the Sonos speaker and stuff, and it's really beautiful. But the headphones, the intimate
headphones
kind of
is the experience for sure.
Yeah.
You get a decent set of noise canceling headphones on, and the whole point is to make it feel like you're there. And I think with Dolby Atmos, you can achieve that for sure. And
cool.
it's really just going to I'm going to just try and keep pushing it to be more and more in depth and detailed. So
I love it.
Silmarillion to come. The Hobbit, I was really happy with how The Hobbit came out. The Silmarillion will be a whole different experience because it's, it's not as up close and personal. So it'll be a different approach to that.
Yeah.
But just to give a little quick breakdown for everyone where I'm at, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit are done.
Yep.
The first Harry Potter is done.
So cool.
The first Wheel of Time is done. The first of the Night of the Seven Kingdoms, if anyone knows those short stories before Game of Thrones, the first one of those is done.
Wow.
And I also did Winnie the Pooh, which is awesome.
Yes.
And that one actually has narration included from Sean Marchese, who's one of the previous hosts of The Prancing Pony. So that's really fun. But then, where I'm at now is that I am in the kind of development stages of the second Wheel of Time, the first Game of Thrones, second Harry Potter, and the Silmarillion. And I've started to outline Dune, so we'll see how Dune goes.
Do you have a job, or is this your full-time job?
This is what I do, yeah. And that's I'm so thankful for the Kickstarters and for people that order from the website, and people that, especially people that pre-order from the website. It gives me the chance to spend this time thinking about, a theme for Barlam and Butterbur and stuff like that. I wouldn't be able to do this if it wasn't the only thing that I did, you know. So all of the Kickstarter and all the pre-orders and stuff really allow me to put all that detail in there. And for those that know the Wheel of Time, that's a long road of 14 books. So we'll get there.
I love it. Man, thanks for so much. Just creating this kind of environment, because I think it's going to allow people to love the books and the stories more, and create experiences for families and people just in a different way. It's so cool, and it's timeless, which is fun.
Yeah, and it's not meant to replace any of those other ways of reading the book or whatever. Yep. But my hope is, and I've had people reach out for Lord of the Rings and for Wheel of Time now, saying it feels like they are reading it for the first time again, and that's maybe the best compliment for this that I could get. So that's really exciting. Cool.
Wow. You have one more sample for us?
Yeah. What do we want? Something chill or something? Oh, we kind of did the epic. So maybe we can play something a little bit more chill. Let's see.
do it.
Yeah, we'll put on the start of one of the earlier chapters.
Oh, I love it.
Chapter 1. Many Meetings. Frodo woke and found himself lying in bed. At first, he thought that he had slept late after a long, unpleasant dream that still hovered on the edge of memory. Or perhaps he had been ill. But the ceiling looked strange. It was flat, and it had dark beams richly carved. He lay a little while longer, looking at patches of sunlight on the wall and listening to the sound of a waterfall. Where am I? And what is the time? He said aloud to the ceiling. In the house of Elrond, and it is 10 o'clock in the morning, said a voice. It is the morning of October 24th, if you want to know. Gandalf! Cried Frodo, sitting up. There was the old wizard sitting in a chair by the open window. Yes, he said, I am here, and you are lucky to be here too, after all the absurd things you have done since you left home. Frodo lay down again. He felt too comfortable and peaceful to argue, and in any case he did not think he would get the better of an argument. He was fully awake now, and the memory of his journey was returning. The disastrous shortcut through the old forest, the accident at the Prancing Pony, and his madness in putting on the ring in the dell under Weathertop. While he was thinking of all these things, and trying in vain to bring his memory down to his arriving in Rivendell, there was a long silence, broken only by the soft puffs of Gandalf's pipe as he blew white smoke rings out of the window. Where's Sam? Frodo asked at length. And are the others all right? Yes, they are. All safe and sound, answered Gandalf. Sam was here until I sent him off to get some rest about half an hour ago. What happened at the ford? Said Frodo. It all seems so dim somehow, and it still does. Yes, it would. You were beginning to fade, answered Gandalf. The wound was overcoming you at last. A few more hours and you would have been beyond our aid. But you have some strength in you, my dear hobbit, as you showed in the barrow. That was touch and go, perhaps the most dangerous moment of all. I wish you could have held out at Weathertop. You seem to know a great deal already, said Frodo. I have not spoken to the...
Hard to not want to just let it keep going. But
Oh no, that's so beautiful. The way the music rises and fades. Yeah. Did you smoke a pipe in any kind of recording?
Not in that scene. But it is really funny to think about those tiny moments, you know?
Yeah.
And just trying to see if you can bring it to life and that minute detail. So yeah.
Yeah,
really
it's
nice.
beautiful. Jordan, it's been a pleasure just hanging with you, enjoying your work. Where can people find all of this?
Yeah. Everything is on my website, jordanrannells.com. You can get all the soundscapes there. You can listen to samples. You can listen to, chapter samples and things like that. There is a code that people can use, Wonder25, if people want to get any of the soundscapes. That applies to everything except for The Hobbit, because The Hobbit is brand new.
Awesome.
But yeah, so people can use that code to dive into any of the soundscapes that are there, or to pre-order other stuff. And I have a Discord that people can join if you want to see what other people think of it, or if you want to share your thoughts as you go through. And I always post in there. I post little samples as I'm going through. I'll be like, hey, here's a little glimpse of something from The Hobbit or something like that as I go through.
Cool.
So yeah, definitely check that out. That's where everything lives. You can find my YouTube from the website as well, which has some samples. But yeah, that's pretty much where everything is. So JordanRannells.com and Wonder25.
It's beautiful. Okay, folks, you heard it. Go support the man. All his work is worthy of your purchase, especially because if you're a fan of Tolkien, you're just going to love it even more. It will open up the book. And I think, like you said, it will help you experience it almost like the first time. And that's a really special way. I wish I can go back to the first time I read it. And that was only 4 years ago. But the movies and Rings of Power and all of these things are in my mind. So to kind of get it away and just strip it down is really special. So, I can't wait for you guys to experience it. Let me know in the comments if you buy this and just go through it. I would love to hear and so would Jordan, your experience. And just thanks for listening to another conversation on the wonder of Tolkien. We do this because we love Middle Earth, but we want to inspire the kind of wonder that the stories do out in this real world. You're living in a great tale, as Tolkien says. And so we want that wonder to produce the kind of joy and adventure that you would take in this world and live with courage. And so I appreciate you. Thanks for hanging, and I'll see you next time on the wonder of Tolkien.
All right.
Peace.